Hi, everyone. This is Samira Daswani, the host of the podcast, The Patient from Hell. Welcome to another episode. Today, I have the utmost pleasure to welcome to our episode David Moriah, who I think is going to give us a beautifully unique perspective on navigating life. And I say life because this podcast episode is going to be slightly different than the rest of them we've done so far, where we will spend a majority of the time talking about the outdoors, adventures, and living your full life. So, with that, welcome, David.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about you. I've listened to a couple of podcasts, so I am ready to go.
All right, let's jump right in. So you, sir, are someone who has lived a life of so many adventures. The more I learned about you and how you've spent the last couple of decades, the more honestly jealous I get because you're living the life that, or you have rather lived the life that I wish to live. So, my first question to you is, can you tell us about one of your adventures? Anything that comes to mind? And I know this is hard because you've been on a lot, but
Yeah,
just any one
sure.
of
Sure. So just to set the stage a little bit, Samira, you've opened the door to my talking about outdoor experience,
them.
outdoor adventures. Um, I have I've been mostly in the outdoor adventure world. I spent my 20s. I like to say sleeping in the mud and swatting mosquitoes. I was an outward bound instructor in my 20s and
Huh.
spent a lot of time leading groups into the wilderness. North Carolina outward bound was where I broke into the field, and I've worked in different outward bound operations in different parts of the country, and also was involved with the Cornell University outdoor education program. I'm a graduate of Cornell University, and as I was graduating, I took an outward bound course, and it was a breakthrough experience, I will say. It changed the course of my life. I spent 28 days on the sea in the Penobscot Bay of Maine, off the coast of Maine, sailing, rock climbing, sleeping on islands, and as I say, it changed my life. It gave me a career direction and a focus that I have pursued over now. Well, it was exactly 51 years ago that I took my Outward Bound course.
Huh.
And I've been involved since then in various capacities, being a instructor, certainly in the field, being a program director, supervising, overseeing operations for Outward Bound, as well as Cornell University, where I came back from my Outward Bound experience at 23 years of age and said, Cornell University needs an Outward Bound like program. And so I set my sights on creating a program within the university. And I'm pleased to say that I was successful at that. And at this point, that Cornell Outdoor Education program is 50 years old. And I moved back to Ithaca, New York to celebrate our 50th anniversary, which is coming up next week. So the timing of this is
Oh.
coincident with a grand reunion where a couple hundred people will be assembling in Ithaca, New York for a celebration of all that's occurred in the last 50 years and looking ahead to the next 50 years. We want to focus on past, present, and future. So that's a synopsis of my life, I guess.
Uh, so, David, you've probably had many, many adventures.
Yeah.
So, can you talk to us about any one that stands out?
Yeah, you'd asked me before this to think about an experience or an adventure that I had, which um, has stayed with me. That's in my mind, and I think I'm going to go back to the very first outdoor leadership experience that I had at Cornell University um, as an instructor in an orientation program for a group of freshmen, 8 or 10 or so, entering students at Cornell, and it was my first outing as a leader. We went to the Adirondack Mountains and we we hiked in for about a mile. We parked the car at the trailhead, and we got our packs on, and we hiked in for about a mile, and we came upon a stream. And the stream had pretty good running water in it. So crossing the stream, there was no bridge. It was kind of an adventure to get across the river. And I decided that, well, I would take the lead. I'm the leader here. I will show people how to do it and show off some of my athleticism at 22 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked, and there were a series of rocks going across the stream, and I knew that what I needed to do was hop from rock to rock to get across, and so I proceeded to dance across the rocks, attempting to impress my charges with how athletic I was, how flexible I was, and I dashed across the stream, turned around, and watched my group enter the stream, and immediately they started falling off the rocks into the stream, left and right. It was like watching a cartoon character. They just would plunge into the water, and I was standing on the other shore watching this. And it's a leadership lesson that I never forgot, that it's not about me looking good as the leader. My job is not to look good and impress people. If I'm really going to be a leader, what I need to do is equip and empower my people to be able to do it themselves. So that lesson has stayed with me through 50 years. And I just thought I would share that because it's a small adventure, but it packed a big leadership lesson for me.
David, I was actually, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I figured I would share a couple of things because one of the reasons I really resonate with your story and with your life experiences is I started scuba diving when I was 10 years old.
Uh-huh.
And, I grew up in India, so not near the ocean, pretty landlocked, large city. But I read a book on orcas, so killer whales,
Sure.
and decided at 10 that I would become a marine biologist and specifically, for some reason, be an ichthyologist, so someone who studies sharks.
Yeah.
And had never seen a shark in my life. But then I was so convinced that I was going to do this that my dad, he would travel for work and we would, tag along occasionally. So as we tagged along, he insisted that I learn how to dive. So I started scuba diving at a very, very young age.
Nice.
The reason I go down that path is I very much resonate with that analogy or that story because it's similar in diving. I'm a trained dive master, and it's exactly the same thing. Your dive is only as good as all the divers in that crew.
Right.
And it is actually not enough for you to be ahead of the pack or to be a really solid diver if everybody else in your group isn't. And it really does become kind of your job to not just ensure that everyone has a good experience, but it's also a safety thing, right? It's, at least in scuba diving, it's a huge safety thing where you are effectively responsible for the safety of that group. So I'm curious. So leadership, absolutely, that analogy for me from a leadership perspective absolutely resonates. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about where in the outdoors do you see safety, trust, group work show up?
Sure. Well, you talk about group work. You talk about you use the word teamwork, and in order to keep everyone safe in environments that have objective hazards and dangers involved, you need everybody's eyes and ears to be open. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about the airline pilots and co-pilots, and this is not my field, so I'm not an expert in that subject, but the one area that I've really focused on is the the checklists that they go through, and also the atmosphere and the culture of allowing anyone uh, who has a safety concern to voice it, no matter where they are in the hierarchy.
Yes.
I'll even bring this back to my first experience teaching at Outward Bound, where I was in staff training my first year. I was impressed by a message which is, if anyone on site sees something that they think is unsafe, they have the right and responsibility to shut down what's happening. And I remember the director giving this message, and he said, even if it's the cook, if the cook sees something up on the ropes course or the climbing site where a knot is improperly tied or an anchor is not fixed right, that cook has the right and responsibility to speak up, and the senior most instructor in the field has to stop action so that and double check the system for
Yes.
safety. And I just thought that was magnificent. And I've read about some parts of the world where where it's very hierarchical and one does not challenge the pilot. And there was a famous accident in Korean Airlines, probably 25, 30 years ago. It goes back. But it was a case where the co-pilot knew they were going into a dangerous situation. They were heading to run into a mountain, and did not speak up because he had a subservient position on the crew. And it led to tragedy. So it's a long way to answer your question. I think safety involves an open culture, a transparently open culture where everyone has a voice, and the leaders, the ones who are executing, have a responsibility to pay attention, listen to that voice, and respond.
It reminds me, actually, I think it was Ford. Ford is the one that set up the process, I think, initially, where they actually implemented this, which was anybody on the manufacturing floor can shut down the operations if they see something that is not right.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
almost
I
like
don't. I
direct.
don't know. It'd be interesting to know the date of that, because when I heard that message in my first Outward Bound staff training, it was 1976. So we're going back 47 years, and I don't know where that initial ethic of it came from.
That could be one of our research topics from today. We can look into that because it'd be
Sure.
interesting to know which one influenced the other, right? Because I do see that a lot of our life ends up kind of intersecting with each other, and sometimes what we do as a hobby might influence professional work,
Right.
and then vice versa.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
would definitely be curious to know about that.
The other thing that's occurring to me, and we haven't started. I know we're going to get to some medical issues and my situation in particular, um, but it occurs to me that a healthy medical system has that same ethic, and
Yes.
does not fall into the trap of the doctor as God, who no one will challenge because of their position or authority. Um, that's a formula for trouble down the road.
So that David goes right into kind of the genesis of this podcast, actually. So if you think about it, I'm going to give you a direct analogy, and then I'll tell you kind of how it intersects with this podcast. Direct analogy is, you mentioned checklists, right? Airline industry, FAA builds checklists, and then there's this incredibly famous moment that happens in the healthcare industry with Atul Gawande's book called The Checklist Manifesto.
Mm,
And he, a famous clinician, author, writes this book because in healthcare, a very heavily regulated industry, presumably very focused on maintaining and executing on quality, sometimes actually becomes incredibly difficult. Like if you look at the medical error rates in this country, it's actually surprisingly high.
I know.
So Dr. Gohande, he writes this incredibly impressive book, and it's so simple in its message, right? Have a checklist. Patient shows up in the ER, have a checklist, because when you are running on adrenaline, you're running on adrenaline, and your brain isn't slowing down enough for you to execute on all of the steps that are not muscle memory, especially if there's a new step included. Anyway, it becomes this famous book. And post that book, a lot of hospitals are, of course, implementing lessons from the checklist manifesto into operations. Having said all of that, there was a second thing you said that, at least for me, resonates a lot, that a really good medical system operates without necessary hierarchy. In the way I think we traditionally think of hierarchy, i.e., oncologist is the god, patient is, or the nurse is subservient, patient is subservient, you do what the oncologist says. I think we're at a point in the world, or I should say, I hope, we're
Yeah.
at a point in the world that that dynamic is shifting. I think that dynamic is shifting because a lot of us now have access to information that we historically would not have had access to. Google has democratized it. We can sit and talk ad nauseum about accuracy of what you get on Google and the value and the trust from information you get on Google. But the point is that we're sitting at a point in time where patients have unprecedented access to information.
Mm-hmm.
And when we show up in the doctor's appointment with questions, I think it is something for the systems that like we are consumers of, right? Healthcare in the US is a business. It is fundamentally a business. It
Mm-hmm.
is not a government provided service for the most part. It is a business. If it's a business and you're a consumer of that business, I would argue that when a patient shows up and asks a number of questions, the business should be mandated to sit down and answer those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the sad reality is that is not what happens,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because of the hierarchy that's existed. And I think it's existed for good reason. I think it was established to benefit patients. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely think that's true. And I think oncologists have very good intentions. I absolutely love our oncologists. I don't think the system is set up to enable patients to act like consumers. I think it is still set up in a fairly hierarchical way where there is a huge power dynamic between the medical care team and a patient. With that
Yeah.
long ramble, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Let me. I want to react to that as a patient because we haven't talked about it yet. But I am going through chemotherapy and I've had 8 treatments, so I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty well versed in how this all works. After 8 treatments and having visited a few different centers to determine where I wanted to go, which provider I wanted to use,
Yes.
um, and I will say that I've been impressed. I've been impressed by the oncology world that I have experienced. So I know it's a small sample size of the entire oncology world in America, not to mention the world, but in the settings that I've been in, I have felt respected. I have felt listened to. And I have also been especially impressed by the collaborative attitude of the practitioners that I have dealt with. In fact, I recently transferred my treatment from Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is where I began, to my local oncology center in Ithaca, New York. And I was very careful to do that because I was very impressed by what MSK did and how they treated me. So I was wary about whether this would work. But one of the things that impressed me and convinced me that I was safe to make that move was the level of communication and collaboration of the oncologists. And in turn, the entire system, the nurses that I've been dealing with have been very patient, answered my questions. And I've said to many people, I feel like I've hit the sweet spot in an otherwise largely dysfunctional healthcare system in America. So, and I'm on Medicare, so that, that's a factor in there too. But it's been impressive. It's been reassuring, and I feel like some of the lessons that you've just spoken about have been taken to heart by at least the people and the places that I have been visiting and getting my treatment for in the last several months.
David, that makes me so happy. It
Good.
makes me incredibly happy. It makes me
Good.
super, super happy because I think that's the whole point, right? That what you described, I think, is where we as a system need to be consistently, like across any system. And for what it's worth, I've had a similar experience. I moved my care from a fairly renowned academic medical system into a community setting, and it has been phenomenal. Like I have actually loved every minute of it. So, for what it's worth, I do think the system is transitioning, but I think it's a transition because I've heard the exact opposite of what you said many times, right?
Yeah.
So, there is a heterogeneity there. And even in my case, there was heterogeneity, right? I think the experience isn't static, it's dynamic. And how we show up is how the oncologist shows up. So the burden's on us too, right? So if you show up in a spectacular way, I'd imagine that your oncology team is resonating with that too, right? So I think there's a back and forth there as well. But I am so happy to hear that you have been
Yeah.
happy with the treatment, respected, heard, listened to. All of that makes me feel just,
Yeah,
I am
yeah,
just
yeah.
super.
I mean, I can't say it's everywhere, but I'm just saying, in my experience, it has. It's given me peace of mind, no question.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think that's key, right? I think there was, I distinctly remember this. For me, the most amount of loss of control
Mm,
happened when I got diagnosed. Actually, when I was in chemo, specifically in chemo. The diagnosis actually didn't throw me into a loop. It was second cycle of chemo that sent me into
mm,
like a spiral of like loss of control.
yeah,
So to hear that you're in chemo, feeling peace of mind and in control makes me feel a very I don't say this lightly, very inspired.
good,
I
good.
don't use that word often because
Yeah,
in oncology there's a lot of inspiration out there, but it really genuinely makes me feel very
yeah,
inspired.
yeah.
So
I
you
can give
have
you
not.
one example that, as I say, we shopped. My wife and I should mention
Yeah.
she's been a key player in this whole thing, and she's from the healthcare field, so she knows the right questions to ask and is monitored a lot. In fact, she does the Google research. I don't. I don't want to go down that pathway. I'll trust her and I'll trust my doctors, but I want to keep my mind free and clear for thinking healing
Hmm.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did some shopping. We visited several places, drove around, and the first oncologist, who was a wonderful woman, I can't say enough about her. We did not end up with her, but during that first visit, she said, "I want to make sure that you have a second opinion, and I'm going to pick up the phone." And she called Johns Hopkins and said, "I have a patient who needs a second opinion. Will you make room for him very quickly so that he can get that opinion?" That blew me away.
There were two things you just said that I just want to underscore. I heard you say I shopped around for an oncologist.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that statement is such a critical statement as we sit here in 2023. And the reason I say that is I think for the longest time, healthcare was not treated like a consumer driven business.
Yeah.
And patients don't think of it like a consumer driven business. But to hear you say that, it kind of emphasizes that we have sort of now switched to a slightly different world where you're on Medicare and you're talking about shopping. And
Hmm.
I think that it's so profound. So I just want to underscore that.
Sure.
Um, and I think the second is what you spoke about. Like, which other industry do you walk into a shop and someone is like, you need a second opinion? I'm going to call up
Right.
the other shop and tell
Right.
you that
Right.
to give you a
I-
second
I'll,
opinion,
I'll
right? So
call
it's
I'll call Target and find out how much it costs over there. Right.
it's such a beautiful analogy. I
Yeah.
love that so much. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Good.
I'm gonna take us down a slightly different route in preparing for this episode. I was reading, you tend to write a lot, right? So I was reading some of the things that are available. And there was this line around, uh, there's this long statement, but I'm pulling out just a little snippet, which is everybody wins. And
Mm,
I think it was a piece of writing around being in the outdoors with a group of people. And there was a small phrase, which was everybody summits, everybody wins.
right.
And I'd love to spend a bit of time on that. I'm going to do a little bit of a preface and then hand it over to you to like expound on that.
Yeah.
So the preface is the following. I do martial arts. I
Mhm.
used to, before the cancer stuff, of course, threw me off for a hot
Yeah.
second, more like a couple of years, but you get the point. I came back to the mat recently, and I'm trained in Taekwondo, so went back to Taekwondo. And the specific school I joined happens to be a school that practices Yang Mundo, which is a contemporary form of Taekwondo that's mixed martial arts. So I say all of this because Taekwondo is a performance-based martial arts. You don't actually use it to fight, like not an
Mhm.
actual fight. Yang Mundo is very different because it uses principles from Judo and Hapkido and Taekwondo, where you are being trained to actually fight.
Mhm.
The reason I say all of that is I'm back on the mat, and part of the thrill of being on the mat is you are fighting an opponent, right? So there is this element of an actual fight, and this element of in order to win the fight, and I put that in air quotes, in order to win the fight, you need to take the opponent down,
Mhm.
right? So there's all that language in there, right? So the takedown, the
Mhm.
you need to throw them to the floor effectively and hold them down. So that there is a lot of that language in there. I say all of that because in an actual competition, your brain goes into a mode of I need to win. It's a
Mhm.
I need to win statement, right? But when
Mhm.
you're on the mat and practicing, we spend a lot of time being really good partners, right? When I'm in the mat and it's the same class, everyone's on the same side, we're practicing our movements, we're practicing our throws. You have to also be a really good partner to get thrown down to let the other person learn, right?
Mhm.
So you kind of go back and forth on I need to win, and then I am a good partner. I need to be willing effectively to be thrown down. So I'd love for you to respond to that, both from a martial arts sport analogy, but also from all the work you've done in Outward Bound.
Whew. Yeah, yeah, those are, and I had a little bit of experience many years ago with martial arts, so I can relate to what you're talking about. Um, what occurs to me from your story, and then I'll talk about the outdoor experience. But what occurs to me in your story is there are two different mindsets that you are in, depending upon whether you're training and being a partner and teaching each other how to do this. But then the switch flips, and you're an opponent. You're no longer a partner, and somebody has to win and somebody has to lose.
Yes.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying
Mm-hmm.
that's the classic approach of sports. It's the classic
Yep.
game theory of there's a winner and there's a loser. Um, and when it comes to the outdoor adventure world, at least the way that I've engaged with it, there is not a winner and a loser. You are a team um, attempting to achieve something, whether
Yep.
that's an expedition where you're trying to get from here to there, or in a climbing situation where you go out, either your personal friends go out together to climb, or I'm in a an organized educational program where we take a group out to climb. Um, and the idea there is that everyone should succeed. And I want to be, I realize that word summit, I want to just tweak it a little bit because there is an element in advanced mountaineering when you're in the
Mhm.
Himalayas and you're climbing Everest or K2 or something, where not everybody summits. And that's okay because you recognize that there are roles that people play. Some are the summiteers, and some are the support team, that they carry the gear to the base camp. Um, so I'm not really talking, but even there, the concept is maybe not everybody summits, but you want everybody to succeed. You want the people
Yes.
who go to the base camp to carry their things and feel satisfaction that they did their part in the
Yes.
expedition. The success of the
Mhm.
expedition
Mhm.
goes across the entire team.
Mhm.
Um, but if you think of it as everyone succeeds rather than everyone summits, either in that advanced mountaineering or when I have a class and I'm taking a group out to learn rock climbing, the idea is not that we come back and somebody won and everybody else lost,
Mhm.
but everybody achieved to the best of their ability. And me as a leader, as an instructor, my job is to teach, train, and push people. Like push, go a little further, give it one
Yeah.
more effort. And the idea is maybe they don't actually make it to the top, but they gave their very best effort. So at the end of the day, everyone can feel that they were winners. Everyone can
Yes.
feel that they pushed themselves to their limit. They got better at what they set out to do, and there's no losers in that scenario. It's interesting because when I started the outdoor program 50 years ago, literally, I looked for a home within the university for our outdoor education program. And a logical place to go was physical education, the department at Cornell of athletics and physical education. And so we found our opening in the physical education department, and that's where we still live 50 years later. Um, and the program is a little bit of a fish out of water in that department because the rest of the department consists of teams that are out
Mhm.
football and hockey and basketball, and they're all out to beat the other teams, to bring down their opponents. And so they spend a lot of time and do a lot of fundraising around, we won this many games, we won the Ivy League championship. And here we are, this oddball unit that's not trying to win anything. we're trying to make sure all our people have successful experiences, and we're not
Yeah.
trying to beat anybody.
Yeah.
So now I will say just a little bit about that. That there have been some creeping competitions. There is now a competitive world of rock climbing, where and it's even been in the Olympics. And
Yeah.
Cornell has now a climbing team that competes against other universities. But
Wow.
I would say even there, the ethic, the culture of the outdoor adventure world is such that people are rooting for each other. People are
Mhm.
helping each other rather than trying to beat
Yeah.
the other climber, and it's a different kind of atmosphere in the
Mhm.
outdoor adventure world um, as a result.
Huh. So, David, here's my question. So, you already alluded to you going through chemotherapy and going through cancer treatment.
Right.
Uh, I was very intentional in giving you my analogy because a lot of the language in oncology in the cancer world is you fight cancer.
Yeah.
Cancer is the opponent. You are
Yeah.
fighting, and your job is to quote unquote win.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there is all of this paraphernalia around you are the warrior, you are the survivor, you are the thriver, you are the winner, you have beaten this thing, you
Yeah.
have taken cancer down. Like there's a lot of language around that. You are, in air quotes again, fighting for your life. So I would love to, given kind of the exploration we just did, where everyone succeeds, everyone wins, the idea that you're on the same team in the outdoor bound world, and yet in sports, regardless of what sport you're on, there are two mindsets. You're
Yeah.
in training, you're working with your team
Mhm.
versus you're in competition, and your goal is to win. My question is, how do you navigate cancer?
Woo. Some of this I've already thought about, but some of it you just you just prodded me in places that I haven't gone before.
Hmm.
So there's going to be a certain amount of what I've thought about and what I'm
Yeah, that's okay.
now thinking out loud about.
That's completely okay.
And this is probably a good time to bring up the language. You might even say the language quirk that I have. You will not hear me use the C word. I told you this early on that I don't name what I'm dealing with.
Yes.
I don't deny what I'm dealing with or the reality of it, but
Hmm.
I choose not to name it because I believe that words have power,
Yes.
and I want my mind not to think about that C word, but to think about
Yes.
health and wholeness and fitness.
Yes.
And so that's where my mind goes. I also don't talk about my diagnosis. Um, the doctors talk about that. That's fine. I trust my doctors and my wife to pay attention to that, address that, and deal with it. But
Yes.
I would rather not talk about it. And this is a long-winded answer to your question, but I will get to it. Um, and one of the reasons why I've established those, I'll call them ground rules for my language and my conversation, is that the first week after I got my diagnosis, everybody wanted to know everything about it. My family, my friends. I had to make changes in my schedule, so I had to explain why I'm making the change in my schedule. And everybody, oh, tell me what's going on, what's happening, where is it? You know,
Oh yeah.
all of this curiosity
Yep.
overwhelmed
Definitely.
me. What's that?
Yeah. I've definitely been there.
Yeah, it overwhelmed me, and 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 it exhausted me, and frankly, it made me depressed. I was
Hmm.
spending time talking about what was wrong with me, and that was a drag. Especially because I was feeling pretty good at the time, and after my treatment, I'm feeling even better. So I have even less reason to talk about what's wrong, what the doctors are doing. Um, so I've made it a practice to just talk about health and wholeness and healing. Let's see, where were we? You asked about, so how do I navigate the winning and losing language? Um, yeah, I'm somewhat conflicted about that because there is a part of me. I mean, I can be a very competitive person. That's
Hmm.
definitely part of my makeup to be competitive.
Hmm.
So I do resonate with the concept of being a warrior and fighting this. Um, but I guess, and here's where I'm thinking out loud. I guess spending too much time uh, putting that armor on and taking that language with me
Yes.
um, is is counter to what I'm trying to do. Uh,
Yes.
and by the way, I have here, I'll give you a little image that I'm playing with in my mind, and that is that you know the old movie Yellow Submarine. If you've
Uh-huh.
ever seen the Beatles movie Yellow Submarine, um, the story of Yellow Submarine is that the blue meanies have invaded. So when I think about what's invaded my body, I don't use the C word. I say the blue meanies have invaded me, and
Mm.
and what I need to do is cast out the blue meanies. So I do
Yeah.
some breathing and meditation exercises, and part of it is blue meanies out of my body, out of my life, out of my
Right.
mind and consciousness.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and the other image that I love is if you watch the movie, um, the secret to getting rid of the blue meanies and casting them out of the land there was music. It was the Beatles songs. The Beatles would sing "All You Need Is Love." I will never forget. All you need is love, and the stars and the rainbows come out, and the blue meanies run away, and and so when I do my meditation exercises, I identify what's invaded my body as the blue meanies, and it kind of demystifies them a little bit. They're less frightening when they're these little blue weirdos that are being chased away by music. And so that's the way I proceed. It is in some ways a battle. It is in some ways it is in some ways wanting to win the fight. Um, but I guess I prefer to think of it in the realm of I'm getting better. I'm getting better and better every day. Um, and how long that lasts, I don't know. As I say, I'm not in denial. I know there's something that's got to be dealt with, and I'm open to the medicine dealing with it. But I want to supplement the medicine with a mindset of health and healing and wholeness and prayer.
Yes.
I
Yes.
want to bring that in too, because I am a person of faith, and I believe that prayer has power, and it is not in conflict with the medicine or science, but it is in conjunction with medicine and science.
I absolutely love everything you just said.
Thank
It
you.
is so spectacularly beautiful. I
Thank
think
you.
the visual of the blue meanings being chased away by music, and then you intentionally, there's a lot of intention in what you're talking about, right? It's not
Yeah,
an arbitrary thing you have chosen. There's a
right.
lot of intention in having a mindset where you are relying on your faith, your spiritual practice, your religious practice, the mindset you have honed for 50 years through the outward bound exposure and through your life of adventure that is playing out in this beautiful fight with the blue meanies and music. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah,
I absolutely love that. That is wonderful. On that note, I normally don't do this, but I told you today was going to be a slightly different podcast. In anticipation of our conversation, I was rereading parts of Into the Wild.
yeah,
And Into the
yeah.
Wild is one of my favorite movies, favorite books. It's such a it resonates with me a lot. So that was a specific paragraph there that I would love to read out and then have you respond to it.
Yeah, I have it right in front of me because it meant a
Oh,
lot to
you
me
do.
too. Thank you for
Great.
sending that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I'm so glad. I did
I
not know
read the
that.
book, but years ago, and I did not remember. It didn't have the same resonance. This paragraph did not have the same resonance 15 years ago when I read it that it does today.
So I'll read it out and then
Please.
I'll ask you to respond to it and we'll use that as our wrap up. Okay. So
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
um, all right. So I'm going to read it out. This is from Into the Wild and it goes, so many people live within unhappy circumstances and yet will not take the initiative to change their situation because they are conditioned to a life of security, conformity, and conservatism,
Hmm.
all of which may appear to give one peace of mind, but in reality, nothing is more dangerous to the adventurous spirit within a man or woman
Yes.
than a secure future. The very basic core of a man or woman's living spirit is his or her passion for adventure. The joy of life comes from our encounters with new experiences,
Hmm.
and hence there is no greater joy than to have endlessly changing horizon for each day to have a new and different sun.
That hit me in the heart. I thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. And I'll key in on one section that I highlighted, which is in reality, nothing is more dangerous to the adventurous spirit within a person than a secure future. Whoa. And I realized this explained a lot to me, I have to tell you, because I have an insecure future. I am hoping and praying and working for a complete healing. Um, and as you know, my diagnosis was very serious. It's a stage 4. I will say that. I won't talk much more about it, but it's a serious diagnosis. So my future is insecure. It could be complete healing, or it could go the other way, and I don't know. I don't know. I certainly know what I want and what I'm working for, but it is an insecure future, and that this line that nothing is more dangerous than a secure future. Um, so I've been given this insecure future. for the first time in my life, really, I've been giving a very insecure future. And I want to be careful about how I say this for anybody else who's dealing with a situation and a diagnosis like mine, because everybody's situation is different. Everybody's not just their diagnosis, but their life situation is different. But for me, when I realized I was in this insecure future, and it didn't take long, probably because of the way I've lived my life, it didn't take long for me to come to the conclusion that this is a new adventure. This is something that I can learn from,
Yes.
I can grow from, I can get closer to my creator by embracing the adventure and making the best of it and seeing what I can learn from this experience.
Yes.
And as I say this, I want to be really careful because I'm in a really privileged place right now, because this chemo has worked amazingly well at knocking out my symptoms and leaving me with very few side effects. And I know that's not everybody's case. I understand that. I have no nausea. I have no nausea. You can't tell, but I haven't lost any hair. I have a little bit of fatigue, but otherwise I'm blessed to live a pretty normal life right now. Now, I don't know whether I'll be able to say that 6 months, a year, 6 years from now. I don't know. It's insecure. It's unpredictable. But the fact of its unpredictability gives me that sense of adventure. And I want to respect those people who are listening to this, who are hurting, and who I'm sorry, but that's real. I'm feeling some empathy for my brothers and sisters who are going through this, and it's tough. It's not what I'm experiencing right now. So God bless them. And if there's anything that I've said that can help those people find some joy, find some peace, move towards healing and wholeness, then my time with you today has been worthwhile.
Here's what I can tell you, David. It already did.
Thank you.
It already did. Because I am in the same community as you. And it already did. So
thanks. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been great.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for being so real with us. We truly appreciate it. And I can tell you and promise you that you have changed at least one person's life. Because she's sitting right in front of you.
That's great.
And I think the lessons on mindset are absolutely crucial. So thank you for sharing them.
Thank you.
And thank you for being on this podcast.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The content here is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.